Hello, welcome to another episode in the CA2VES webinar series. Today we'd like to talk about using research to reflect on teaching practice. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Stephen Cotton. I'm the Instructional Design Coordinator at the Center for Workforce Development. And I help design courses, work with our VR team to develop VR simulations, and do a lot of other things around curriculum and digital learning resources. So that's kind of who I am, and I will be your host today as we look at what we can do to increase our research in technical colleges and two-year institutions. All right, so we want to talk about why we do research, why it's important, maybe the challenges that are associated with trying to do research, especially at two-year colleges, and some ways that we can do research right now, even before a new semester starts, using some of the resources we already have available to us, maybe some that you haven't even thought about. We'll take some questions and answers at the end, but we'll also pause at the end of each one of these sections to give you a chance to ask questions. And please feel free to focus your questions in the Q&A panel rather than the chat box. The chat we'd like to reserve just for any technical issues you might be having. But please feel free to write those questions down, and you can write them down at any time during a section. And if something occurs to you towards the end that goes back to the first section of the webinar, that's fine to go ahead and add that, and we'll go ahead and address your question. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about what or who the Center for Workforce Development is and what we do. So the Center for Workforce Development is a center at Clemson University. We are also the Center for Aviation and Automotive Technological Education using virtual e-schools. And we are an ATE center, or an Advanced Technological Education Center. And what we do is we provide digital learning tools. We identify and promote career pathways. We work with K-12 schools to help develop their STEM education initiatives. And we also do a lot of research and networking between two-year colleges, a lot of industry partners, and other people interested in workforce development, advanced manufacturing, and STEM and education initiatives. So, and you can see some of our partners down below. Of course, it's not limited to those, but those are just some examples. So we do a lot of work in a lot of these areas. So why are we talking about research at two-year colleges? Why is this an important topic? Why is this relevant? Why is the Center for Workforce Development engaging in this conversation? It's been our mission since we first became a center about 7 years ago to work to partner with technical colleges and two-year institutions and develop the workforce here in the upstate of South Carolina. But we also want to see our digital learning tools used, of course, across the United States and elsewhere if they are helpful. But that's been our main goal. One of our main missions has been to assist two-year institutions. And we rely heavily on the expertise of two-year colleges. You are the people that we go to for our subject matter experts. You're the people that we really rely on your expertise to develop our learning tools. We couldn't do it without partnerships with the two-year institutions here in South Carolina. Currently, we're working with Greenville Technical College to develop an FAA program, or aviation technician program, to help train aviation technicians. This is kind of an example of what we do and how we try to promote research even with our partners. We identified that the growth in aviation is set to grow for the next 10 plus years, and that there's a growing need for aviation technicians and a need to recruit young people into aviation technicians as a career pathway. So one of the ways that we identified that we could do this is by offering some of that education online. And so we've done that, and you can see if one of our instructors here on a instructional video talking about tube bending as one of the courses in the general curriculum. What we try to do is, in our research with this, is we've kind of identified the need, and then we went ahead and looked at, worked with our subject matter experts to make sure that we knew how we needed to present this information. And they identified a number of areas where students struggle. There's a gap between what the instructional video or the instruction can tell you to what they have to show in a demonstration lab. So we developed, on top of the actual instruction, we also developed the demonstration videos so that students can actually see how a tube could actually be bent, and then a VR simulation to practice that. So kind of a three-step process. And that was based on our research with our subject matter experts to kind of help inform key areas in the instruction that students needed special assistance. So that's just one example of what we're doing and why we're interested in this. And something that we've noticed as we worked with our two-year college partners is that a lot of folks are not really interested or really aware of the importance of doing research, either in kind of what we're doing with our partnership with Greenville Tech, or just in general looking and reflecting on their own teaching practice. And we thought it might be helpful and instructive to kind of think about that. And so that's why we are talking to you today about how you can do research in your classroom and help you reflect and inform your teaching practice. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these things and see what we can do to improve our practice. So why do you do research? Why is it important? One thing that research does is it helps sustain and renew your mission as a two-year college. And what is that mission? Well, two-year colleges, one of their main missions, and one of the things that they've identified that most two-year institutions will tell you, is that their main mission is teaching and learning, is helping students learn the content and doing it at a high quality level. So we want you to think about, as we talk through this section, maybe why do you think research in education and teaching practice is important? How do you think it could help you in your practice? And you may never have considered this before, and how research is relevant. You may even have thought research is not necessarily helpful at all. But try to think about and keep an open mind and think about maybe how it could help you as an instructor and in your education practice. All right, so two-year colleges are influential. They take in about 30, right now it's about 30% of all undergraduates. It has often been as high as 40 or a little bit over 40%. It really depends on a number of different factors, the economy and other things. Funding also helps, sometimes limits the number of students in two-year institutions. The research and projections for growth are quite positive, and so it's expected that two-year colleges are going to continue to grow in the next 10 plus years. At the same time, four-year colleges are expected to probably shrink and represent a shrinking number of undergraduate students. So not only are two-year colleges very influential in the fact that they impact a huge section or percentage of undergraduate students, that share of undergraduate students is expected to grow. Two-year institutions are also on the front lines of job training and workforce development. And so they are some of the most engaged institutions in developing that aspect of our education. At the same time, students and faculty at two-year institutions are an incredibly diverse group of people. They come from many different backgrounds. Two-year institutions most have an open enrollment, where the only thing that you need to matriculate into a program is a high school diploma. Of course, students that come into your institutions, into two-year colleges, they often come with a very diverse number of skills or types of skills, or sometimes diverse skill level. And so sometimes we have to really be creative and think about how we can reach those students and meet their educational needs. Faculty also often don't have are not formally instructed in education. They come from industry and have, to go into teaching their particular discipline. So these folks are very, very diverse, and they have really a variety of needs, but it has a big impact on the instruction in higher education. So you have a big voice if you choose to use it. So not only are you very influential, there are also a number of unique challenges that two-year institutions face when they try to look at increasing research at their institution. Of course, you have a great amount of diversity among student and faculty. Graduation rates are often very challenging or sometimes of concern with administration and faculty at two-year institutions. Sometimes the relevance of the programs as far as that program meeting the needs that industry leaders need or local industry need. Sometimes that doesn't always meet. Sometimes right now we have a declining enrollment in two-year colleges. Some of that is to do with the economy. Some of it has to do with states and other government entities pulling back education support dollars from their programs. So two-year colleges have to rely a lot more on tuition. They don't have other types of things like funds from their, funds that four-year colleges have. And so when you're looking at these things, it's really helpful if a two-year college maybe sees that they have declining enrollment. Maybe they need to think about what their local context is and what is causing that, and maybe not just blame it on the economy, but also look at whether they are articulating their programs closely with four-year colleges for students who want to transfer after 2 years, or meeting the needs of local industry. Are they offering the types of programs with the sufficient rigor that local industry leaders need? So having an open dialogue and even communicating with local high schools and to make sure that some of the advice, career advice that counselors are giving and the types of subjects that those schools are offering are things that are going to fit well with what your programs are, as well as what industry leaders need. So it's really important that two-year colleges really kind of communicate because of some of the uniqueness that you in your faculty and staff and the students that enroll and some of the needs that you are trying to fill in our workforce. So it's important, and it really does support your mission, even though teaching and learning is your main focus. Making education accessible, accommodating the learning styles of a really diverse student body, and developing relevant programs that fit the needs of industry leaders. These are all things that research can really inform you on a institution and programmatic level, as well as in your individual classrooms. So so it can help in a lot of those areas as well. There's a lot of pedagogical benefits on an individual faculty member's level from researching your classroom practice. So as a member of the teaching profession, you can collect a lot of empirical data on your teaching practice and really kind of look at what you're doing in the classroom and show or prove that you are an effective teacher, or it can inform you on things that maybe are less effective. It gives you respect from your students, colleagues, and administration, and shows your proficiency as a professional. And it helps model to your students, a good, solid research practice. Because your students, you are a technical college, you're an institution of higher learning, and a lot of the things that you're focused on are in the areas of science and technology and math and engineering and advanced manufacturing. And these are all things that rely on science and scientific method and solid, and correct research practices. And so modeling that to your students can be really effective teaching tool in helping them learn how to do research for themselves when they graduate or finish their certificate and go out into the field. So lots of different benefits from research on lots of different levels, on the student level and the classroom level, as well as at the kind of institutional and programmatic level. And there's other benefits as well. It really kind of, when you think of yourself as a professional and you're as an intellectual, following intellectual pursuits, there's satisfaction in being an instructor and in teaching students content that they're going to use to follow a career. And doing research can help support that and make your professional life a lot more satisfying. Whether it's writing grants and using data that you've collected in your classroom at your institution to help support that grant. Or maybe it's you're trying out something new. Maybe you have converted your face-to-face classroom to an online platform, and you want to test to see if that transition is as effective or maybe even more effective than teaching your students in person. Maybe you need to change policy to help meet some of the needs of your faculty and students. And so at an institution-wide level, maybe that's something that you need to look at. And you think it's a problem, but you don't have a lot of hard facts, and so you need to collect that information. Or it's informing your teaching practice, or it's affirming that a new technique you've tried is actually effective. These are all things that can help support you intellectually as a professional at a two-year institution. So it's a real benefit to everyone at the institution, not some sideline that someone might do as just because it interests them. So at this point, we want to pause. That I've tried to make the case for why research is important at two-year colleges, and we were trying to focus on why you think research can help you in your practice. So if there are any questions out there that you have, we can pause and answer those now, or we can wait, and if something comes to you later on, we can take that question towards the end. All right, why don't we keep going? And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask those in the Q&A box, and we will definitely respond to those. All right, so we have some ways that research can help us. Why aren't we doing it? Why don't more two-year colleges engage in research? Why don't more faculty from two-year institutions do that? There are a number of different challenges, both at an institutional and individual level, and so we're going to look at some of those things in this next section. So what prevents you from doing research, and how can you overcome these challenges? So that's the question we want to think about as we look at this section. And again, just a reminder, please post those in the Q&A window. So what are our institutional challenges? Why don't more two-year colleges encourage research? Or why don't more faculty do research at their institutions? A lot of times there's very little time for faculty to do this type of thing. At four-year colleges, many faculty often have a much less, or they have a teaching load that is not nearly as full. Most faculty at two-year institutions have 5 classes a semester. So they are very busy teaching. Many of them are part-time, they're adjunct faculty, and they work at other locations, so they don't necessarily have time or see the importance of doing research either. It's harder for two-year colleges and the faculty to get research dollars. And a lot of times their institutions don't really recognize the need from it, so it comes from the actual administration. They don't encourage it. There's not a program for faculty to engage in research or help them get started. If you're a faculty member at a four-year institution, you often come in with a small grant that you can use to start your research. You get access to a graduate assistant to help you do the research work, and those are all resources that aren't available for many two-year college faculty. So it's on many different levels. It's at an institutional level, it's at an individual level. There's a general lack of support and recognition. and it's not really an institutional goal. The administration has identified excellence in teaching and quality learning as the goal of a two-year college. And so they ignore research, and they don't really promote it with their faculty. And we'll talk later about how this is really can be short-sighted, and there are a lot of things that impact the function of a two-year college that research can help improve and make better. I mentioned faculty attitudes a minute ago, and definitely a lot of faculty at two-year colleges don't really see the need for research. It's not my job. I am here to teach. I am here to offer quality instruction. It's not my job to do research. That's someone else. I don't even collect data, so I don't have any research projects of any kind. Maybe the pressure of meeting the teaching standards and helping your diverse students is enough that you don't feel like you can take any time to think about doing research on your teaching practice or on some interest that you might have. And a lot of faculty they see themselves as a knowledge transmitter, and this is something that even the administration would many times encourage. They don't see themselves as a knowledge maker. So the idea that they should do and conduct research is just kind of a foreign idea. Whereas at four-year colleges, it's understood and is intentionally promoted that the purpose of four-year college faculty is not just to come in and to provide excellent instruction. Their purpose is also to continue their intellectual investigation and pursuits into their particular research interest, and that doesn't just help them write papers and get accepted into journals and go to conferences. This also helps their teaching practice and enrich the content that they're teaching in the classroom. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but faculty attitudes are very crucial, and from the administration on down, the attitudes are that that's not our job here at two-year colleges. And I think maybe that's something we want to reconsider, because there are a lot of benefits from doing this. The other challenge that some people might cite as a difficulty in pursuing research is that, well, I just don't know how to collect data. I never do that sort of thing. And I don't even know how to set up a research project. But you really already have. If you are an instructor at a two-year college, you have been collecting data as a matter of course for as long as you have been at that institution. If you have grades, you have to do a student survey at the end of the year. You may have anecdotal feedback from students, whether it's a message that they've written on a test or a comment they've made in class. You have a lot of information at your fingertips that you can use right now to look just at your classroom practice. Maybe you're not setting up a big research project that needs thousands of dollars to function, but you can look at the data that you already have and that you've been collecting since you have started teaching and inform what you're doing in the classroom, and maybe look at it, help you identify areas that either you're doing really well at or could use improvement. So you have a lot of information at your fingertips if you choose to use it. And so this is an important thing to consider, is that you are a researcher. You are already collecting the data. You've already made the first step in doing research. The next step is to take that data, analyze it, identify what it's telling you, learn from it, and then put it into practice. Now, maybe I haven't made the case for doing research yet. Maybe you still are thinking, well, this is not really my job. I don't have time. There's no money. Many of the different challenges we've already cited. But it's a really vital and important role that two-year colleges often are not doing enough to foster and promote. And they can have a lot of real consequences in the mission that two-year colleges have taken on. And part of that is that with with a disengagement from research, which is something that has been happening for many decades, and that there are lots of different programs that are trying to kind of change that idea. The focus on teaching and not research is isolates two-year colleges from the rest of higher education. And when you consider that most two-year colleges have open access for so anyone with a high school diploma can attend, you are taking in a student body that has a diverse variety of skills and academic backgrounds. And a lot of times, the fact that you're not doing any kind of research in either in good pedagogy or classroom practice or in whatever your field or discipline is, that means that there's often a lack of institutional support to support those diverse learners. And so if the faculty member is not going to look at how they can help their students master the content and skills that they need, there may not be anyone there to help them. And so it's really important that research be engaged in, because that helps you learn different ways to help students that may be having trouble. And there's also very diverse faculty at two-year colleges. And many faculty come without any kind of formal educational background. And so if you are not thinking about your classroom practice and trying to learn more about what is considered best practice or more modern teaching techniques, you're cut off from kind of the mainstream of higher education and what a lot of instructors are doing. And so that's something that it's really important then that two-year faculty think about their classroom practice, since they may not have a lot of background in formal teaching techniques. Like in the K-12, you have to go through teachers college or a teacher preparation program, and or otherwise you cannot get a license to teach in a elementary or high school classroom. We don't do the same at a two-year college or a four-year college, and so it's really important that if you are going to learn and be aware of what is considered good practice for teaching in the classroom, that you do some of that learning on your own and test those ideas and maybe collect data to see if those things are working. And so there are all of these things. If they're not being done, it's causing a lot of two-year colleges to start falling behind their four-year counterparts, and that has a lot of impact on things and a lot of consequences that are unfortunate and oftentimes cause stereotypes to develop about two-year colleges. We know that four-year colleges dominate the research on two-year institutions and research in general, obviously, but even research about two-year colleges and what's happening in those institutions, very little of it is being done by two-year college faculty members. A lot of it is being done by four-year institutions. And representation in a lot of your research forums, for example, grants or research money or journals, these places often don't have a lot of two-year college faculty being represented. Sometimes there's a reluctance to provide reciprocity between two-year and four-year institutions. Some of it is maybe the fact that two-year colleges don't contribute to researching their own discipline and their own institution. And so four-year college faculty members often call into question the quality of the programming as a result. And that is really unfortunate, because of any group of people, two-year college faculty members and administration are the best. They know your context better than anyone else. And the fact that most of the research done on your institution is being done by an outside party is not giving us the full picture. It's helpful, definitely helpful, and it's always helpful to have an outside party examine what's happening and can provide an insight that you might not have from the inside. But having that familiarity with the two-year college context also is important. And to give that up to only focus on teaching, I think is unfortunate, and is something that hurts the overall program of two-year colleges. And so these things, so that you're then marginalized. You're without a voice in higher education. It's a voice that's not heard, and it's a voice that's important. And you represent such a large swath of higher education. To not have that voice represented is really unfortunate. And so I think it's vitally important that you engage in this research and represent your institution in the research forum. So we've been talking about making the case here for research, and I've been talking about how important it is. Taking it away from kind of the larger picture that we were talking about on the earlier slide, if you just look at doing research on a classroom level, it can also really improve the practice of professors and their classroom practice. So, and this is where maybe when professors who don't have, or instructors at two-year colleges who don't have a background in education, maybe they've come from industry, they've gone back to gone into the classroom to teach mechatronics, perhaps, and so they are really good at what they do. They know mechatronics inside and out, and they have a lot of good insights that they can provide to their students, but they have no background in how to conduct a classroom. And so they're kind of learning as they go. And so making folks like that kind of aware of what, what's considered good educational theory and how you should practice, learning is really important, because it helps broaden their understanding of pedagogy, of how to teach. Because they know their content, but they don't know necessarily how to communicate that content to a student. And so if you are encouraging them to do research and just do research on their own classroom practice, that helps connect educational theory, helps acquaint them with educational theory, to then turn that understanding into actual practice. Because there is a very strong link, and there's no reason why theory should be separate and practice should be something different. The two should be connected to one another and informing each other. So, and then an example of that would be, let's say I wanted to talk about Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. That sounds very theoretical, very researchy. Maybe you think I don't even understand that. It's just too many abstract ideas. But all that is it's just talking about how students learn and how they have a finite ability to take in new information, and so there's a certain amount of knowledge that they're going to be able to understand without any assistance. So let's say you're teaching an algebra course at a two-year college, and your students can do very well with their homework in, say, binomial equations or linear equations. But you know that they're going to need help, and so you're going to have to work in the classroom and scaffold their maybe they're working polynomial equations. Maybe that's something that is a little bit harder for them to do. But at this point, maybe at the beginning of the semester, if you try to introduce to them a lesson on calculating probabilities, that's just out of reach. Even with a lot of scaffolding, you're going to have trouble helping them understand that concept, because they're not ready for it yet. And so you're going to have to work through kind of those first two levels of learning before you get to that last one. And so maybe being acquainted with this theory helps you understand then how you need to organize the information in your classroom, and putting that into practice and capturing data on that and student outcomes based on how you organize that, then helps you understand, okay, this is a good way to organize it, but maybe that instructional technique wasn't effective. Maybe it was relying too much on that out of reach understanding, and I need to do more scaffolding to cover that concept. And so you're linking then the theory, zone of proximal development, into actual practice in your classroom. And that's how you can connect those two things together. And that helps then improve the teaching practice of a particular faculty member who doesn't have a lot of background or formal instruction in how to teach students. So that, I'm going to pause there. That kind of finishes our section on the challenges of doing research at a two-year college. Do we have any questions about how to do that research, or a challenge that you have, or anything about that section, or the previous section where we were talking about why you should do research? We have one question. Someone asked, would you recommend that a two-year college instructor reach out to a four-year research institution to find out how to do research? Absolutely, and that kind of gets us, that's a little bit ahead of where we were going. Our next session was going to take how to begin doing the process of research, starting with your classroom. But I would definitely think that if you have a research question that you want to study, and you're not sure kind of how to set that up, but you know what you want to look at. I think if you can find someone at a four-year institution to help you and support you in developing that question and kind of maybe your research project on that, I think that's definitely something that you should do. That you don't have to do it on your own. Why not get the expertise from someone who does? And that doesn't matter if they're not, at your institution. So that could be really helpful. Someone else just had a question on how to get administration on board for research grant projects. Well, that's where maybe doing some of this research to start out on your own, just collecting data on your classroom, can be really important. Because if you can show an administrator that, okay, this is my question, maybe I'm noticing that a lot of my students coming into my class are not at the level of understanding algebra that I think they should be coming into a two-year college. Maybe I think there needs to be more remedial work done. If I do it, then I'm not going to get through the content that I'm supposed to cover this particular topic. Maybe collecting research. Maybe it's a pretest before they begin the class. Maybe you do some surveys to find out about their educational background. There could be a lot of ways to look at that. But I would say collect a little bit of data on your class or whatever the question is, and then go to your administration and say, this is what I'm noticing in my classroom. This is the data that I have that supports this observation. And I would like to try to get some money or apply for a grant that might help me understand this idea better, or maybe intervene, maybe set up an intervention that will help improve student outcomes in this particular area. So I would start with collect as much, do your own research, find out what other people have written about this topic, if they have, what they've done, collect all of that and present it in a organized fashion with your administrator. And that's where I would start. And you can show them and prove to them that this is an issue and you have data to support that. That definitely helps in convincing them that they should give you some money. Hopefully that helps that question. I'm going to go ahead, if I don't have any more questions, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next section. And in this section, what we want to talk about is using research to improve practice. So remember that those data sets, I'm going to use a researchy term, remember that those pieces of information that you collect every single day as an instructor. We're going to talk about how you can use some of those pieces to inform your classroom practice. So how can you use research to improve your classroom practice and academic program? So we want to incorporate research into our professional life. Maybe we don't do it, maybe we don't do it as much, And so we want to really think about how we can do that. And we've talked about how, as an instructor, we collect data on our students all of the time, every day. We test them and record their grades. We have grade books. We have the class roster. We have a lot of student feedback. We have student surveys that we give at the end of the semester. There's a lot of information that you can access, and that can tell you a lot of things about your teaching practice and its effectiveness or not. And so right now, it's the middle of the summer. You're not going to collect any more data on anything. You're relaxing and recovering from the previous semester, but you can think about your practice. Maybe think about a question that you have about your student and their outcomes. And so then forming a question, maybe, why were my students' grades lower on the first test of this semester? Why did they say in their surveys, why did maybe 30% of the students said that the pace of the class was too slow? And maybe you want to look at some of those things in those questions. Analyze them, look at the grades, the student comments, the personal records, and kind of see what the data might show you or tell you as the cause of the problem or cause of this comment. And then trying to learn from it. Try to learn and maybe change what you're doing. Maybe you don't have a perfect solution. Maybe it's not definitive, but it can point you in the right direction. And maybe at the beginning of the semester, collect some information from your students. Say, hey, I noticed this comment from my students last semester. I kind of looked at some information to try to confirm what they were saying. I thought about what I've been doing. Maybe ask them some questions about what they think is important, or maybe some questions about pacing to see if what they say is what is important to them might confirm kind of what your previous students said. So that's just kind of a general idea. But these are some things that you can do. So let's look a little bit more specifically. We're going to take each one of these aspects of data that you collect, surveys, tests, class roster, and so on, and we're going to look at them individually and see what we can learn. Because we want to use our research data, it's really important to use it to help us identify less effective classroom practices, inform our performance, gives us insight into class diversity, which as a two-year college professor, I have probably a pretty wide range of diversity, whether it's racial diversity or gender or education background, and so on. And I want to review, any ineffective learning components that I might have. So let's take a look. We're going to dive into these 5 areas and see what we find. So we're going to look at grades first of all. So what can grades tell us? What can you learn from that? One of the things you could do is you could take a look at maybe just your class average. So find your class average over however many sections that you teach, and see if that average is changing over time. Maybe look at the last 5 years if you've been teaching that class that long, and look to see if there's any variation. And then think about why that is. Maybe you see a sudden increase in and maybe not a lot, but maybe by 2 or 3 percentage points, maybe by 5. And maybe think about why that might be increasing. Have you changed any of your teaching style in any way? Maybe your teaching methodologies. Have you introduced a new technique that you haven't used in the past, or stopped doing something? Maybe you just have a field placement a component to your class, and you dropped it for whatever reason, and you notice that students' outcomes are not as high as they had been in the past. So there's lots of different things you might want to look at. But when you see a sudden change over time, then you want to think about what could have caused that to happen, and then maybe in the next coming semester, focus on that and collect more data from your students and see if your guess is correct. So that's one thing that you can do, is looking over time. You could compare class sections to see if one class is performing better than another, or you can Maybe even compare groups within the class. Think about, who is attending your class. Are there people that are not in that discipline? They're just taking it as an elective. What's the composition of class? And maybe think about if they're not performing as well, maybe you have to tailor your teaching to kind of reach them to help them be more successful. Student feedback. This is something we collect every year. Your institution most likely requires it. If they don't, you should definitely be doing it on your own, because it's a vital part of learning how you're, the kind of job that you're doing. And it can be really painful. It's hard to see those numbers if they're low, or if those student comments, they're not comfortable. And but there's a lot of learning that can happen if you look at them. So it's great to see the enjoyables, best teacher ever kind of comments. It is a little bit harder when we read the pace of the class was too slow, classroom discussions were boring, or what have you. And so look at those comments and see how many students actually said that. Look at all of your comments over all of the class sections that you do. Maybe go back. I mentioned looking back over time. Maybe look back over time and see if there has been a change in student comments, or if you can find more examples of a particular type of comment. And if that's the case, or if you have something, think about it. Think about your class, and maybe there are some things that you need to change in order to meet your students' needs. So, and then also look at the positive ones as well. And if there is something that they relate to in your class, you definitely want to keep doing that. Maybe do more of it. So look at those ratings, look at the comments. Those comments can really inform you on what your students are doing. And so the numbers are great if you get a 5, or let's say it's on a scale of 1 to 5, you get a 5 or a 4 or a 3. But the comment then related to that is also important, especially if it's something that's a little lower than you think it should be. That can help you understand what's happening in your classroom and maybe what you need to change. Class roster. Now that might seem like the most boring document in the world, and not be very practical or informative, but it can tell you the breakdown of the students in your class. And looking at that, looking at the demographics of your class, if there is something going on where maybe that class average is lower than your other sections, look at the makeup of that class, the gender, the racial background, maybe the socioeconomic status, the major. Like if you have maybe a lot of students in that class that aren't there, it's not in their area. Maybe it's a mechatronics class and they're just taking it for elective. I don't know. But to look at that and see if there's something about that class diversity, the makeup of that class that might be affecting, and then figure out, affecting your student outcomes, and then figure out a way to reach those students and help them be more successful, or help motivate them to be more successful. Something else that maybe you look at is look at individual students in the class and see, how many students did fail that class and how low, and maybe look at, okay, so in my grade book, I see that, maybe 2 students failed. I look over here at my attendance record and I see that they only came for half the class, or they didn't come for the last 4 weeks of the semester, and so maybe that's something that you might want to think about checking more frequently, be more proactive about, so that you can red flag that to help maybe the student counseling services, because if it's help them reach out to that student and find out what's happening. Because you don't want a student who fails a class may then decide to drop out and they they're no longer in the program. And if you can identify that early on to help that student, then that's something that's beneficial to him, beneficial to the institution, because you want that dropout rate to be as low as possible. So class rosters can be important, and they can help identify things that are going on with your students. Of course, your assessments, that I kind of referred to this a little bit perhaps when we were talking about grades, but looking at tests to see how they compare, maybe, and look at each test over 5 years and see, okay, maybe maybe that first test of the semester was low. Why was that lower than before? Maybe you changed your methodology in some way, and maybe it wasn't as effective for students. Maybe you forgot to or didn't think it was important because it was review material or something you expected them to know, to provide them with a study guide. And maybe in years past you have, and maybe that tells you that that test preparation is really important for them. So there'd be a lot of things that you could look at. You could even look at individual test items, depending on how your tests are set up and so on. But there's a lot of ways to look at that and see that won't take too much time to see how students did on different test items. There may be a question in there. Maybe you added a new question that is not being understood well, and so it either needs to be reworded or dropped in some way so that it's not hurting your students' outcomes. So these are a lot of things that can help improve your. So assessments will be another area that you can look at. So all of these different things, and what I wanted to focus on in this webinar was looking at data that a faculty or instructor at a two-year college already collects, and using that to reflect back on the past semester, the past year, and think about their teaching practice and ways that you can improve. And that was all I wanted something that could be practical and useful right now, rather than something that you have to wait on and then you forget what the information was. So that was my goal for this first webinar, is make it practical and something that's useful right away. We want to do another webinar in this series looking more at being more active in our research. And a couple of areas that we want to look at are using reflection and maybe setting up specific data collection tools that can help us reflect back on our teaching. It could be inviting a colleague to come in and observe us and help us understand maybe what we're doing. It could be a video that you record your classroom and then go back and watch and analyze the video to see, to help you inform your practice. You could set up an action research project where, let's say, you compare the performance of one section or two sections of your class course with two others. Maybe you've decided, I want to institute a more hands-on project. Maybe you have a partnership that you develop with an industry partner, say BMW, that's a capstone project that the students work on. And so you want to collect data on student performance and outcomes to see how that goes, and if students actually learn, if it actually adds value to your classroom and the student experience. Maybe, and another area that we would want to look at is perhaps scholarship of teaching and learning, and that's looking at that's also a reflective process where you problem solve things that you might identify in your classroom or with your students, and you work together with other colleagues to improve your practice as well as their teaching practice. And it's a deliberative, and you're looking at trying to improve not just your content expertise, but the how to teach expertise. So both of those things together. So that's something that we want to address looking forward in our next webinar. But for now, we are going to end this by taking a moment to answer any questions that you might have. Our focus question was how you can use research to improve your classroom practice. And if there are any questions and answers, we will be happy to take those. There is one question: is there a recommended practice in analyzing research data? I don't have any background in this. A recommended practice in analyzing research data. There is, and there are a lot of things that we could get into on how to analyze your data. But right now, I think just starting out, I would just start looking at what you have and organize it in a way that makes sense and that you can see trends over time. So when I was talking about you're looking at your assessments, for example. Let's say you have 3 big tests every semester. So you could look at each of those tests individually, and maybe the test 1, you look at that for the last 5 years. How have students performed on test 1? And so you could put that into a spreadsheet, test 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, and you can put the class average. You could separate it by section or just aggregate all of it together to get an aggregate number for a number percentage, and then look and see if it changes. So that it's a lot of it is about organizing the information so you can see a trend. However, that is going to work, and depending on what your question is. But you would want to organize it in a way that makes sense so that you can see a trend. I guess that would be my best answer, and it really depends on what your question is and what you're studying. But that would be my answer for that. All right, well, from Educate Workforce and the Center for Workforce Development and CA2VES, I want to say thank you for listening in. And I hope that some of the things we had to say about research and looking at your classroom practice was helpful. And we hope that you tune in again next time when we talk about doing some more action related research topics. Thank you.